Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a collection of hundreds of monster ecology and strategy videos on my channel. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing as I upload at least twice a week. At long last, rising from the damp depths of my mouldering pile of notepaper and requested content, her musty mist of intoxicating spores billowing before her in an ever-alluring miasma of verdant doom, rots blossoming bride, the unending underdark tide, the demon queen of fungi, Zuggtmoy. In this video, I'll be covering the Demon Lord's history in the Dungeons & Dragons game, her home on the 222nd layer of the Abyss, her relationship with the Demon Lord Dewey-Blex, who also resides there, her goals and motivations, her unique followers and influence, as well as her activities in the mortal realm and her role as a potential warlock patron, object of fanatical cult veneration, and perhaps one of the most dangerous demons the Abyss has ever seen. Do you feel a glimmer of interest? A lure of hidden secrets is the warm and comfortable embrace of Dungeons & Dragons nerdiness, drawing you deeper down into its bright and endlessly fascinating array of forms, patterns, colours, and sensory delights. Could this heady mixture, so geared to swelling your imagination and catering to your wants and needs, be some sort of hallucination? Could it be dangerous? Could it be a trap? Fungus is one of the most ancient forms of life, one of the very first to venture out of the sea and onto the land. It turns raw minerals into fertile soils, creeping and burrowing underneath the surface, out of reach of the blazing light of a brand new star, growing into every nook and crevice, infiltrating every biome, sending the first spores high into the atmosphere to rain down all over the planet, adapting, shifting, capitalizing, forming predatory, sedentary, symbiotic, parasitic relationships with all other forms of life. Fungus is the hidden world on which ours is built. This barren planet is barren, were it not for fungus thriving. Without it, we die, and yet, with it, we are constantly playing a risky game of give and take. A balance kept for billions of years, a balance that, if upset, could swiftly eradicate all life on this planet, aside from fungus, which would grow and consume it all. Zuggtmoy first appeared in print as part of the Lore of the Greyhawk setting. Zuggtmoy played the role of a companion demoness to the chaotic evil demigod of deceit, evil, oppression, pain, and wickedness, the old one known as Auz. The aspect of Zuggtmoy revealed to Auz and the world of Earth is that it is a vaguely humanoid torso with 4 huge elephantine legs with a body of bloated flesh, like some sort of a demon puffball fungus. Of course, the mortal realm is not kind to her, so she's somewhat worse for wear, as she spent a lot of time imprisoned in the Temple of Elemental Evil. While back home on the 222nd layer of the Abyss, her realm was being usurped from her by the demon of Lord of Slime and Ooze, Dewey-Blex, something she has yet to fully recover from. She's also had a long-standing conflict with Lolth, as they frequently clashed on the perpetual battleground that is the Abyss, but Lolth has since attained the lofty heights of becoming a fully fledged deity, and Zuggtmoy, quite annoyed at this, seems to have her sights set on the same goal. Zuggtmoy certainly has one element of that in place, and she is one of the oldest named demon lords in D&D's game's history, with a very early inclusion by Gary Gygax in the game's beginnings, foreshadowed and revealed in various adventures. She was only the second Demon Lord to appear in a D&D adventure, following Lolth's debut in the Queen of the Demon-Wed Pits. She was a major foe in her first edition AD&D form, with 49 hit dice, plenty of spell-like abilities, and even psionics. She ruled over fungus and incarnated as either an old crone or a bulbous puffball mushroom monster. Much like a fungus, she has lurked in the background, just under the surface, and now and then pops back up into prominence and blooms a fresh batch of horrors and adventures. Since the video game release of the Temple of Elemental Evil in 2003, Zuggtmoy has revealed a far more feminine, regal, demon queen appearance, which I'm pretty sure is here to stay. I thought I would simply narrate the extensive article from Dragon Magazine number 337, published in November 2005, written by the talented James Jacobs, illustrated by Kieran Yanner, for the Demonomicon of Igwilv series, the exploration of Zuggtmoy, Demon Queen of Fungi, with, as per usual, lots of thoughts and comments inserted by me as we go through the material. So, in the dark and moistened places of the world, life takes on a sinister cast. Things that grow like plants yet shun the light of the sun hold sway in these rancid reaches, often resorting to parasitism or worse in order to survive. The most wretched of these are the beloved children of Zuggtmoy, Demon Queen of Fungi. Tales of particularly dangerous fungi are a staple in adventurers' taverns, with wild-eyed explorers speaking of poisonous moulds and lurking mushrooms and shuddering at some cancers that infest the flesh of the living. These misbegotten growths thrive in the dark places where civilization dies, in the lightless, monster-haunted caverns of the Underdark, on soggy, fog-shrouded isles, lost in nameless swamps and in darkened forests too sickly to support proper life. Yet Zuggtmoy's leavings do not constrain their fecundity to the forgotten corners of the world. They extend into everyday life, growing fat and tumescent in the sewers below the greatest of cities, or spreading silent yet swift through the fields and furrows of the kingdom's desperate children. Woe to the nation which citizens come under the Queen's sway, for its leaders and heroes are often the first to fall victim to her sodden wrath. Lots of moistness in this text, I'm afraid. So this foul creature looks somewhat like a human from the torso up. Her body is made of fungus, slime, and thick fibrous cords and tendrils that look like they have just happened to grow naturally into the form of what would otherwise be an attractive woman. 4 large, fibrous, antler-like horns grow from her head, and her hands appear exaggeratedly large talons. Her lower torso is a coiling pillar of fungus tendrils, lashing ropey tentacles and other growths braided into a snake-like lower torso. The end of her tail is long and sinuous, arching back behind her in a cruel scythe blade. Her eyes are pale like white puffballs. Her skin is a nauseating swirl of greys, blues, purples, and blacks, the colour of an unhealthy mould and slime. Fluid and moisture drips and spurts from her body in odd places. The Demon Queen of Fungi is often content to spend her time in the 222nd layer of the abyss, allowing her fungoid children to tend to her every need and desire. Her realm is populated by the cursed souls of those who have been claimed by her cults on the material plane, and when these idle playthings grow sparse, she turns her attention to that plane, seeking to increase the power and influence of her vile worshippers. Zuggtmoy's personal symbol is a broken jawless skull with a sickly mushroom growth growing from a hole in the crown, although her cultists often adopt her other symbols that more closely correspond to the particular ethos. The cults of the elemental eye, for instance, using a burning eye as the symbol of their chosen elemental focus instead. Zuggtmoy has no fear of combat. If she's given the opportunity to smash and ruin living flesh, she rarely backs down. She's never encountered without a full complement of fungus creatures, and typically arrays these minions around herself in a defensive circle. A fungus circle. Her fibrous, flexible body gives her surprisingly good reach for a creature of her size. She takes advantage of this by keeping her allies close, by preventing her enemies from engaging her in melee attacks. Against ground-born foes, she prefers to make use of the improved ability to trip and waylay them. But I'll be talking about her 5th edition stats later on in this video. And she, of course, has many Tanari and fungal forces, which is a little bit different because she's got that extra addition of fungal creatures, which some demon hunters may not be prepared for. And, of course, she can transform people with monstrous transformations, and her damaging abilities are quite often wounding, and she can drive people crazy with spores, which we'll talk about as well. Her aspect enjoys travelling to the material plane, although after her recent failure at the Temple of Elemental Evil, she is understandably cautious about her stays there. As a result, she more often sends her aspect to tend to matters that don't require her full attention. Her most common aspect is a physical manifestation of her brute force and strength. This aspect has the appearance of the large grey puffball balanced upon 3 elephantine legs. 3 ropey pseudopods radiate out from the aspect's body, and a bloated, beady-eyed head balanced upon a thick stalk leers from atop its frame. Her cultists sometimes call upon this aspect with a planar ally or planar binding spells. And the stats presented for the 5th edition could be used for this one, or the more regal, queen-like aspect. Doesn't really matter either way. Her goals. She's been long struggling with maintaining viable cults in the material plane. The main problem is simple. Most humanoids have little interest in worshipping fungus. She might get some success in the Underdark, where mushrooms are viewed not as parasites but spring from corruption, but as a life-giving source of food in a realm where most crops simply don't grow. Yet her cults face much competition in these other realms, especially from drow, who brook no encroachment into their vast territories. Zuggtmoy has achieved some success in tricking or luring lone, powerful entities into her servitude as well. She often gifts these unique worshippers with great powers and demonic enhancements in return for their loyalty. The Thralls of Zuggtmoy constitute one incarnation of such worships. Her most notorious hero priest, though, was the druid, this is a really hard one to say, Zahevorax, Zargevoxhab. See the Scarlet Tide in the Dungeon Magazine number 85. Following clues left by her, Zargevoxhab discovered a pocket dimension infested with a particularly dangerous fungus known as the Scarlet Rust. The druid learned quickly that the Scarlet Rust consumed living flesh, transforming its victims into fungoid scarlet children. With Zuggtmoy's aid, Zargevoxhab learned to control the scarlet children, transforming himself into a horrendous fungoid monster. So great was his power that he became known as the Scarlet Lord and ruled a vast reach of the Underdark. His rule was finally upset once again by the Drow, this time with Kotoa allies. The unlikely alliance broke Zargevoxhab's rule and imprisoned the fungoid druid in a deep underground lake. I'm just going to call him the Scarlet Lord from now on. That's an awful word to say. Binding his body with the magical chains of true binding. When the Scarlet Lord was accidentally released, he very nearly rebuilt his fungus kingdom, but was put down by a group of adventurers from the surface world, even though they could not destroy him, though so vast had his power grown, and Zuggtmoy might have further use of him yet. Zuggtmoy's greatest triumph, however, was the foundation of the Temple of Elemental Evil. She hit upon the idea of using the four elements as a basis for a cult many years ago. She sent several of her most charismatic followers into the world to recruit the new cult, and found people only too willing to join. Before long, the Temple of Elemental Evil was flourishing. The beauty of the cult's composition, with its four divergent paths, air, earth, fire, and water, prevented any one cult from growing too powerful, so that Zuggtmoy's cult could remain in command and over them all in the background. Yet the appeal of the elemental evil proved to be its downfall. The cult had soon grown too large and successful, and it began to draw unwanted attention. Zuggtmoy turned to another deity of the realm, an old Cambion named Iuz. With his support, she hoped to establish a realm of her own on the material plane, as the armies of the Temple of Elemental Evil marched on the surrounding lands. Zuggtmoy herself was called to the material plane by her clerics. This would prove to be her greatest mistake, though, for her arrival forced the hand of the Circle of Eight, a group of powerful wizards, after a terrible battle. Zuggtmoy and her armies were defeated, and she was bound in a small section of the temple's dungeons, unable to return to her abyssal lair or even to venture out beyond its walls. Of course, the Circle of Eight includes some very famous wizards. Eventually, Zuggtmoy was freed from her prison by a group of adventurers, and she managed to return to the abyss, but not without leaving a significant portion of her essence behind. This essence was utilized recently by a new and even more sinister group of cultists bent on restoring the Temple of Elemental Evil. Suffice to say, now that she has managed to escape her prison, Zuggtmoy has lost interest in her elaborate false cults for the time being, and has turned again to building on smaller cults of fungus worshippers. Her current goals are to reclaim the solid control of her abyssal realm. Her imprisonment in the Temple of Elemental Evil gave Dewblex, the demon prince of slime and ooze, the opportunity he needed to claim all of the Lairs' underground caverns as his own, and even some of the remote corners of the surface realm as well. I'll be talking about the surface realm and how startlingly different it is from what you probably think later on in this video. Although many of her cultists are druids, clerics also constitute a significant portion of Zuggtmoy's faithful. Clerics of Zuggtmoy have access to the domains of chaos, evil, and plants, and her favourite weapon is a scythe. The cultists, actual cults of Zuggtmoy, are fairly small, usually numbering no more than 6 to 8 members who actually know what's going on. Often all members of the cult belong to the same family. They live quiet lives in remote rural areas, usually in bogs or other moist regions, just far enough from the beaten path that they don't have to worry about too many inquisitive visitors, but close enough to trade routes that they can kidnap the victims for sacrifice. Cultists of Zuggtmoy procure the majority of their sacrifices in this way by snatching lone travellers from the roads. Those who are captured by a cult of Zuggtmoy can expect to suffer all manner of monstrous rituals. When out on raids, cultists usually wear horrific leather masks that cover the lower half of their face. These masks help somewhat to hide the cultists' identities, but their true purpose is to honour their queen's monstrous mouth. One particularly loathsome ritual the cultists of Zuggtmoy force their prisoners to take part in is the final feast. Those who hope to become a thrall of Zuggtmoy must voluntarily take part in and survive this feast. Without the protection of spells like neutralize poison, these individuals are usually allowed to use magic to enhance their fortitude saving throws, but also their constitution. But the sacrifices to Zuggtmoy aren't allowed to do this. Creatures naturally immune to poison already are considered blessed by the Queen of Fungus and do not need to undertake this deadly ritual. The final feast ritual consists of a 5-course meal served upon a warped table of wood made from the coffin lids of those murdered by Zuggtmoy's cultists. So they have to go and dig up the bodies of those they've murdered. The 5 courses of the final feast and the attendant dangers are as follows. Each takes about 5 minutes to complete. A large stein of bitter ale brewed from striped toadstool, a platter of boiled id moss. Boiling the moss slightly lowers the normal DC for the save DC for the poison, but enhances its vile taste. A bowl of chilled soup made from slime mold and rotting mushrooms laced with tiranav root. The main course consists of a single violet fungus tentacle glazed from various noxious molds and mildews. And the final dessert consists of a small stack of ficomid stalks served in a thick, bitter black syrup made from the basidiorond sap and sprinkled with yellow mold spores. A victim who survives the final feast and remains conscious wins the right to be returned to the cult's prison and left to starve to death. It's charming. Those who succumb but do not die are faced with a far more horrific fate, Zuggtmoy's Cradle. This disturbing method of sacrifice involves burying a helpless victim in a shallow grave in a bog. Often, the victim is bound with rope made from his own hair. In cases where the victim's hair isn't long enough, many cultists have taken to stitching the flesh of the victim's arms and legs together. Once a victim is placed in a shallow grave in the bog, which is called the Cradle, he is fitted with a mask similar to those worn by the cultists themselves, only this one is affixed with a long leather tube. The victim is then buried under a layer of sod and peat, so that only the tube protrudes from the grave. This tube allows the victim to breathe, and cultists' daily visits to pour spores laden with gruel down into the tube to give the victim nourishment. This gruel has the unfortunate side effect of growing into pallid fungus and mushrooms inside the victim's body. Someone force-fed within Zuggtmoy's Cradle takes 1d4 points of their constitution damage every day until they die when their constitution reaches 0. Until then, his hoarse screams, distorted by the breathing tube, can last for hours at a time. Cultists are careful only to select the most remote locations for these cradles as a result. Being a thrall of Zuggtmoy, they're pretty horrid to behold, often emaciated and always encrusted with fungal growths. These cultists adorn their bodies with blue coiling tattoos. They take the worship of their foul queen to the extreme and treat their own bodies as their most sacred altar. The closer their bodies grow to resemble that of their queen, the closer they are to purity. A thrall of Zuggtmoy generally doesn't lead a cult, but is often looked on as a prophet or an oracle by these groups. Druids and rangers make the best thralls of Zuggtmoy, although clerics with access to the plant domain do well as the thralls. Other spellcasting classes can become thralls of Zuggtmoy, but they often have to research or create spells related to fungus in order to prove their devotion to the Queen of Fungi before one of their cults accepts the characters for a final feast. So, yeah, there's some information here on the cultists. And Zuggtmoy's minions, favourite minions are fungus monsters, creatures such as violet fungi, phantom fungi, which I'll be covering in a later video, Ficonids and evil myconids. So she also enjoys the company of other plant creatures, although these monsters always sport vile fungoid growths and are, on a whole, far more disgusting and foul-smelling than standard plant monsters. So a shambling mound that's completely encrusted with monstrous fungus is quite possible. She also utilises slimes, oozes, and other shapeless minions. Of the various fungoid creatures, her two favourites are not actually plant creatures at all, but are rather outsiders. The first and most common are the foul Rukazrazils from Monster Manual 2, natives of the elemental plane of Earth, and these creatures are often called to the primaterial plane via planar portals by her cultists. A large number of advanced Rukazrazils, including several of the largest, dwell in her palace, and they serve Zuggtmoy as messengers and assassins. She's got some other monsters, which I'll probably cover in later videos as well, since you won't be familiar with them in 5th edition. So, yeah. She often finds herself at odds with other demon princes whose hunting grounds on the prime-material plane often overlap with hers because she's quite often concealed. The most famous of these, of course, is the deity Lolth, a demon whose loyal base of drow worshippers have granted her transcendence into full godhood. Lolth's new position of power has effectively elated her out of the classic competition with the demon Queen of Fungi for control over the Underdark, but the two entities still foster a seething hatred for one another and, given the opportunity, spare no expense to ruin or humiliate each other's followers. Of more immediate concern to Zuggtmoy these days is the faceless Lord Deweyblix. She shares her domain with this demon lord, and as a result the two have a long-standing feud. Deweyblix's hold is the strongest in the deep caverns that sprawl below Shidakla, which is the name for the 222nd layer, whereas Zuggtmoy controls the surface realms of Shidakla. The caverns between the two realms are a terrible perpetual battleground of oozes and fungi. As one gains a hold on one place, it is forced to relocate forces to another to shore up defences. Each is constantly searching for an edge over the other. Zuggtmoy's dalliances with the cult of elemental evil would have given her a tremendous advantage had the plot worked to her full expectations, and it did turn out the years that she spent trapped in the temple of elemental evil and her resulting loss of essence had the opposite effect. Deweyblix now controls all of the underground realm of Shidakla, and the ooze wells up in many regions to the surface. So far, Zuggtmoy has been able to stem this advances, but it will be some time before she regains a foothold in the caves below. And if I can cross over to one of the adventures, the Lost Laboratory of Qualish, there is a certain lake of oozes that was summoned at one point, and that may well have come from Shidakla. Yet Zuggtmoy certainly doesn't count all like-minded demons as enemies. She seems to be on good terms with Demogorgon and has often been seen cavorting in the poisonous laboratories of Harginti, Lord of Alchemy. She also has entered into alliances in the past with the demigod Iuz, although the outcome of her venture involving the cult of elemental evil left a sour taste in her mouth, and she has yet to rekindle communications with the old one. Despite that fact, they were lovers for many years during the height of the Temple of Elemental's evil's power, of course not in a traditional sense. Finally, Zuggtmoy counts at least one minor demon lord as a personal thrall, and this is the festering rancid lady of bitter bile known as Yibiru. This simpering poison-skinned abomination is thought by some to be Zuggtmoy's child, and others to be her senile mother. In any case, the foul-mouthed and fouler-smelling creature serves the Queen of Fungus as a sort of demented chambermaid and major domo, and is often charged with keeping Shidakla safe during Zuggtmoy's journeys to the prime-material plane. For all her faults, Yibiru has yet to fail in these tasks. Invaders have found her rage and potent poisons, which are said to be able to harm even other demons, more than enough reason to avoid Zuggtmoy's palace even when she's away. Certainly it was Yibiru's presence that kept Deweyblix from conquering all of Shidakla. So, if we'll go to the description of the plane itself, there's actually a few monsters in here, which I'll be talking about in later videos. But I want to keep this video somewhat under 40 minutes. I'll try. So, Zuggtmoy's realm is the 222nd layer of the Abyss, a realm known as Shidakla, the Slime Pits, situated between two sluggish branches of the river Styx. Shidakla is a vast bog interspersed here and there by low hills and fog-shrouded moors. Shidakla has few outlandish features to mark it as an otherworldly realm. To the visitor from the prime material plane, Shidakla may even look like home for a time, but there are differences. Foremost among them is the fact that Shidakla has no stars, sun, or moon. The skies above are constantly overcast, dark, and gloomy. Often, the clouds take on appalling colours like mud brown, bruised purple, or foul rotten green. Storms are frequent, torrential downpours and thunderous storms that leave vast swathes of land flooded. There are no true oceans on Shidakla, only deeper marshlands, and the temperature always seems to hover around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity is uncomfortably high, so it's a sweltering place. Everything in Shidakla seems to be covered in a thin layer of clinging moisture, sweaty. The inhabitants of Shadakla are mostly demons. Vroks are common in the skies above, and Vathagus and Hezraus stalk the bogs below. Chasmes and Rutakin can be encountered with some frequency as well. They can be pretty much on any layer of the abyss, although they aren't actually Tanari. Rakarazil are common here as well. All manner of fiendish and half-fiend swamp monsters dwell in the bogs. Oozes, slimes, and jellies are surprisingly uncommon, since these creatures are hunted and killed by Zuggtmoy's agents, who view these monsters, rightfully so, as the eyes and ears of the faceless Lord Dubilex down below. The most common creatures in Shadakla, of course, are plant monsters. Most of some form of fiendish or half-fiend fungus creatures, like the ones that I'll be talking later, phantom fungi, myconids, that sort of thing. Other plant creatures like shambling mounds and red sundews are present as well, although they are generally infested with fungoid parasitic growths, but they still get around okay. The most tragic inhabitants of Shadakla are the lost souls captured by Zuggtmoy's cult. Most of these souls are actual cult members who have died before accomplishing anything of note, and therefore did not earn a place in Zuggtmoy's side. Some of the souls there are the spirits of folk given over to the Cradle. Creatures sacrificed in this manner have days to consider their fate, and most eventually give up on their own faith long before they actually die. When they eventually do perish, Zuggtmoy is as close to a deity as their broken minds can accept, and so they end up here on Shadakla. These souls are listless, broken figures, similar to what they were in life, yet without the drive to achieve anything more than basic survival. Don't forget, they are driven mad by the spores of Zuggtmoy long before they actually die. So that's definitely a factor. They have no joy, and when they aren't seeking shelter from the floods or avoiding any one of the numerous abyssal predators, they loll about in huts made of sticks, bones, and mud, hopelessly fishing for food that is too infested to eat. These lost souls are constantly hungry and endlessly ruined. Zuggtmoy often farms them for fertilizer for her favourite fungus gardens. Shadakla is a jewel layer, a vast network of caverns that dwarfs any colliery to the material plane, stretches below the dripping surface of the abyssal layer. These caverns are said to extend all the way down to the 223rd layer of the abyss, and are domain of the faceless Lord Dubilex. Although there aren't many notable locations on the face of Shekala, two locations in particular stand out and are worthy of mention. The Grasping Crater. There's a massive about a 100-mile diameter crater ringed by jagged hills of razor-sharp obsidian. The rim of this crater juts out of the surrounding bog to heights of more than 10 miles in places. Numerous caverns allow passage to the bog through this rim of razor peaks to the vast region within. Inside, the walls of the crater constantly roiling mud and thick ropey fungus. The ground shudders and heaves, acting like a massive open mouth gaping from the surface of the realm. In the crater's centre, a funnel-shaped hole sinks down into the twitching ground. The crater is a fairly new addition to Shadakla. As part of her thanks for aid in establishing the Temple of Elemental Evil, Zuggtmoy allowed the demigod Ayuz to secret his soul object here in her return. The impact of its arrival created the gasping crater, and the object itself is lodged deep under it. The crater is guarded by flocks of advanced rocks above and numerous bebeliths below, so it's dangerous in the extreme. Zuggtmoy's Palace is a massive structure that sits what is commonly held to be the centre of Shadakla, itself a nonsensical conceit, as the boundaries of this plane are infinite, as are many other planes of the abyss, consisting of 24 mushrooms of pale yellow and rancid brown. Zuggtmoy holds that these massive fungi are the largest in the multiverse. Certainly, there may be some truth to this claim, as each of the mushrooms towers nearly 4 miles into the air. These massive mushrooms are surrounded by a field of acidic puffballs and poisonous vapours. The mushrooms themselves are all interconnected by bridges of shelf fungi, and countless chambers have been hollowed out from within the rubbery, fibrous stalks. Not even Zuggtmoy knows the full layout of this tangled keep, although she often claims otherwise when asked. So, if we turned to the 5th edition Monster Manual, to Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, since I thought I would cover the recent history as well. During the Rage of Demons, Zuggtmoy found herself transported to Netherlight Grove in the Underdark, where she proceeded to enthrall the Myconids, Philo and Yesterbrut. After becoming aware of the being Oromykos, she began making plans to merge with the organism in a mock wedding. In Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, we learn that she is utterly inhuman, able to mould her fungoid form into an approximation of a humanoid shape, including the skeletal thin figure depicted in grimoires and ancient art, draped and veiled in mycelium and lichen. She and her servants take these elaborate forms deliberately to serve as a soulless mockery of mortal life in all of its facets, something that she and all of her servants wish to break down one day. Her principal lair is in the Palace of Shekelar. It consists of 24 mushrooms of pale yellow and rancid brown, as I've just described. While appearing on the mortal plane, she's most likely to be a greater aspect of the Demon Queen that the player characters are facing. A challenge rating 23, it's still a major threat, but not as dangerous as if Zuggtmoy actually incarnated in her true form and full power in the material realm. First off, her regional influence, as her potent presence permeates a large territory. The region containing Zuggtmoy's lair is warped by her magic, creating one of the following effects. Moulds and fungi growing on surfaces within 6 miles of the lair, even where they would normally find no purchase. It's just the place becomes infested. Plant life within 1 mile of the lair becomes infested with parasitic fungi, slowly mutating as it's overwhelmed, so the landscape takes on a twisted, tormented aspect. If a humanoid spends at least 1 hour within 1 mile of the lair, that creature must succeed on a DC 17 Wisdom saving throw or descend into madness, determined by Zuggtmoy's special table of madness. A creature that succeeds on the saving throw isn't affected by this regional effect again for 24 hours. And if Zuggtmoy dies, these regional effects fade over the course of 1d10 days, as is per usual. Within the presence of Zuggtmoy, she has a number of lair actions. On initiative count 20, losing initiative ties, Zuggtmoy can take a lair action to cause one of the following effects. She can't use the same effect 2 rounds in a row, so only 1 lair action per turn. Zuggtmoy causes 4 gas spores or violent fungi, violet fungi, to appear in unoccupied spaces that she chooses within the lair, and then they vanish again after 1 hour, but that's more than long enough to get into combat with somebody or seriously inconvenience them. Up to 4 giant creatures that are friendly to Zuggtmoy and that Zuggtmoy can see can use their actions to speed up and make 1 melee weapon attack. Their reactions to move up to their speed and make 1 melee attack. Zuggtmoy uses either her infestation spores or her mind control spores centered on a mushroom or other fungus within her lair instead of on herself. So she can basically use her mushroom spores from a ranged position, using another mushroom in her lair. The madness of Zuggtmoy. If a creature goes mad in Zuggtmoy's lair or within line of sight of the Demon Lord, roll once on this table to determine the nature of the madness, which is a character flaw that lasts until cured. So that's normally some sort of a restoration spell. So 1 to 20 is I see visions in the world around me that others do not. So basically you just have hallucinations that pop up all the time. So you can pass notes to the player character, to the player saying your character sees this, react accordingly. They can periodically slip into a catatonic state, staring off into a distance for long stretches of time. That's typically while they're waiting around between combat encounters and stuff. They don't do that while they're in combat. They can see an altered version of reality, with their mind convincing itself that things are true even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. So they may see a pit open up before them which has got screaming maws and faces in it, and they will absolutely refuse to take 1 step further because there is a pit there as far as they're concerned. Their minds may be slipping away and their intelligence seems to wax and wane, so they may spend moments going duh and just not recalling things. They're constantly scratching at unseen fungal infections, which can cause painful rashes as they scratch fastidiously. And yeah, her aspects has an armor class of 18, 3d10 plus 128, or between 160 and 448, with an average of 304 hit points. And by the way, does it strike anyone as kind of pointless to have a randomly generated number of hit points for a unique, powerful entity like that? I just say Zuggtmoy has 304 hit points. Nobody bats an eyelid. She is immune to poison, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage that is non-magical. Has resistance, taking half damage from cold, fire, and lightning. She cannot be charmed, exhausted, frightened, or poisoned. Has true sight out to 120 feet, passive perception of 21, and plus 11 to all perception checks. Is plus 9 to dexterity saving throws, plus 11 to saves for constitution or wisdom. Speaks and understands all languages and has 120-foot telepathy. Intelligence of 20. Innate spellcasting powers based on her charisma of 24, creating a spell save DC of 22. Her listed spells that she can cast with ease, so without any material components, detect magic, locate animals or plants, and ray of sickness at will. She can cast Dispel Magic, Ensnaring Strike, Entangle, and Plant Growth 3 times per day, and Etherealness or Teleport once per day. Other abilities of Zuggtmoy, so she's got Legendary Resistance, so if 3 times per day she can just choose to make a saving throw. She's got advantage on all saving throws against spells and other magical effects. Magic weapons that any weapon she picks up and uses count as a magical weapon. She makes 4 pseudopod attacks each round. They're plus 13 to hit, have a reach of 10 feet, and do 2d8 plus 6 bludgeoning damage plus 2d8 poison damage. Her infestation spores that she can use 3 times per day. She releases spores that burst out in a cloud that fills a 20-foot radius sphere centered on her, or, as her lair effect suggests, she may use a mushroom within a certain distance from her as well. It lingers around this cloud for 1 minute. Any flesh and blood creature in the cloud, when it appears, or when that enter it during its duration, must make a DC 19 Constitution saving throw. On a successful save, the creature can't be affected by these spores for 24 hours. On a failed save, the creature is infected with a disease called the Spores of Zuggtmoy, and also gains a random form of madness from the table that we had just gone through. That lasts until the creature is cured of the disease or dies. While infected this way, the creature can't be reinfected, and it must repeat the saving throw at the end of every 24 hours, not every round, ending the infection on its success. On a failure, the infected creature's body is slowly taken over by fungal growth, and after 3 such failed saves, the creature dies and is reanimated as a spore servant, if it's a type of creature that can be a spore servant. So basically, you'll find the spore servants listed in the Myconids under the Monster Manual. The Mind Control Spores is a recharge ability that she can release on a roll of 5 or 6 it recharges. She releases the spores again in a burst that fills a 20-foot radius sphere, centered on her, this one, and it lingers for 1 minute. Humanoids and beasts in the cloud, when it appears or that enter it later, must make a DC 19 Wisdom saving throw or a Constitution save. The creature can't, on a successful save, the creature can't be infected by these spores for 24 hours. On a failed save, the creature is infected with a disease called the Influence of Zuggtmoy for 24 hours. While infected, the creature is charmed by her and can't be reinfected by these spores for 24 hours. Charmed by Zuggtmoy. One of the disadvantages of being charmed by Zuggtmoy is that when Zuggtmoy is hit by an attack, one creature within 5 feet of Zuggtmoy that is charmed by her must use its reaction to be hit by the attack instead. So essentially it goes, "No, my queen!" and leaps in front of a slicing blade, a fireball, you name it. They will sacrifice themselves willingly. Her legendary actions, she's got 3 legendary actions, choosing from the following options. She can make an attack using one of her pseudopods, or she can exert her will on one creature charmed by her that she can see and must use its reaction to move up to its speed as she directs, or to make a weapon attack against a target that she designates. She's like, attack your friend. Yes, my queen. And that's it. That's all we've got on Zuggtmoy. Please hit the like button if you've made it this far. Subscribe if you like what I do. Check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and all the full scripts for these videos. Buy some merchandise. Wear your geek with pride. There's a special discount code, GlueStick, for a 10% off high-quality metal dice and accessories from D&D WoW. And as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.